Alright, so in my last video, I talked about why people hated Type Soul, but in today's video, we'll be talking about the rise of Type Soul. First, we'll talk about why this game is continuing to hit new milestones every single day, like almost averaging 50k players every single day. Even when the game was not updating, they were still averaging upwards to 30k to 40k players. And this is crazy. Those are a lot of people playing your game almost every single day. And to think that we're talking about Type Soul, the same game that also was averaging around 44 active players, and now it's averaging 50k players, it's just crazy. First, we'll be talking about old Type Soul. Now, the reason why Type Soul decided to go offline and for the developers to work on the game is because of the overall game as a whole. Old Type Soul obviously wasn't completely bad. I feel like the reason why the game was doing really good for the community was mainly because of the PvP and because of its uniqueness of the game. People being able to make different types of builds, and also people finishing up those builds even if you were a Quincy, Soul Reaper, or Hollow. Each of those slots were very difficult to actually complete your build, obtaining your Vault Standing, your Vastilores, or you just being a Soul Reaper and obtaining your Bankai. But that's definitely a part of the reason why eventually Type Soul did reach its demise. It's because of the progression just overall being so difficult. Like I mentioned earlier, that's also one of the reasons why the game was averaging 44 active players. I feel like the main reason why Type Soul was doing so good was due to the PvP of the game. It was actually really good, especially if you were actually good at the PvP. Even a majority of the community comparing it to games like Deepwoken that are literally known for their combat and PvP. I feel like also Type Soul having the option to make different types of builds, like let's say you want to make a speed build or a Hakata build, you have the option to make a whole build about that, and even make hybrid builds by mixing both of those two things together depending on what race you are. On top of the game also having raids, I feel like that's the main reason why early Type Soul was just doing very good for the community, and not a lot of people had complaints until people started realizing there was a lot of things wrong with this game. But other than that, the progression was also taking into effect. Early Type Soul progression was absolutely brain dead. People having to spend hours and days just to obtain stuff like their Bankai or Vastilores. It was absolutely crazy on why the Type Soul progression was so bad to begin with. In my opinion, I really don't know why the developers early on were making it that bad. They could have fixed it so easily back then, but they chose not to. But to be honest, we're not going to talk too much about that, because eventually with the game currently right now, they did fix that progression and made it a lot easier, which we're going to be talking about more later on in this video. But other than that, I feel like the early Type Soul progression, if you never played Type Soul and you're calling the progression right now hard, you'll be surprised on how bad the progression was back then. On top of the game being very money hungry, with people having to spend on average thousands and thousands of Robux just to obtain their right Shikai or shift that they actually wanted. I've even seen with a lot of CC and a lot of YouTubers spending upwards to $500 to $200 on this game in one sitting, which I feel applies to the reason why old Type Soul was falling off completely. Obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about that because we want to focus on the rise of this game, the positive stuff. But still, with all positives, there is definitely still a bunch of negatives. One of the main reasons on why old Type Soul was also doing really bad was the lack of communication between the community and the developers with the release of the game. Now, obviously, when I'm talking about the community, I'm also mentioning testers, CCs, and a bunch of other things, but I feel like the main reason was the mods of Type Soul. Majority of them were just fucking brain dead. I have to say it, if I'm being dead honest. I'm seeing people get banned for listening to music. I'm seeing people getting banned just for enjoying the game, and I'm seeing people get banned just by voicing their opinion, which is also very similar to a bunch of mods from this one game, Deepwoken. But obviously we're not gonna get too much into that. I feel like games organizations like Type Soul need to make sure that they're obviously communicating with their community quite often, because Type Soul is quite literally PvP based. If majority of the people in your community are telling you to nerf this one thing and you're just not listening to it, obviously people are going to leave that game because they had enough with your shit and you not listening to the people that are actively playing your game every day. Which later meets up to the overall main reason on why Type Soul was doing completely bad in players was ownership issues, which we see happens with Type Soul Battlegrounds. Now, if you guys don't know about what happened with Type Soul back then, I'm gonna just give you the short stuff. Pretty much the files were leaked. Now, with the files being leaked, someone made a Type Soul Battleground in which you can literally hop on the game and test every single build up to that point that the game has to offer. So let's say you want to mess around and get Bloodbound Kai, you could get Bloodbound Kai. Let's say you want to mess around and just max yourself out when it comes to Hollow and getting Vassal Lourdes, you can do whatever you want. You can do Vampire, a bunch of other stuff. You can just max out of it. Also, with that file getting leaked, people also noticed the rates of the game, in which I don't have too much context about it since it happened a while ago, but all I do remember is that when those rates were leaked, a lot of people were unhappy because some of the rates were not true as they say. And the reason why a lot of people were actually upset is because they are spending money, a lot of money on this game just for them to be finessing the rates like this and not giving people back their money. But other than that, I could keep going and on why Type Soul was just completely a shithole. But with the game now, it's flourishing if we're all being honest, and I feel like that's because of the developers actually reflecting with the time of Type Soul being closed off and seeing that they actually need to start fucking working on the game and putting in the work that they should have been doing since the first place. One of the main differences was definitely the progression. The developers actually listened to community and made progression a lot easier for Soul Reapers, Quincy's, and Hollows, making it easier so people can obtain their true final builds faster and not have to spend weeks and trying to complete their builds, and which was a big issue with old Type Soul. Don't get me wrong, the old progression was obviously really bad, but I feel like them switching to the progression and making it a lot easier is definitely a part of the reason that Type Soul Battlegrounds was literally taking their players from their game. I think they even had a rule on if you play that game, you're gonna get banned if you get caught, a bunch of other shit. Eventually they removed that because it just sounds stupid. But yeah, it was getting crazy. So I feel like that's the main reason on why they made the progression a lot easier to actually get, because they didn't want to face that issue again. Also with PvP definitely got much better visually through a lot of the moves and feel wise. Despite people saying that it barely changed, it really did change. If you actually played the old Type Soul and you were actually pretty decent at the PvP, then you'll notice the difference. Also with the developers adding a parry system, which in my opinion really didn't add anything to the game. The parry system for Type Soul, it's pretty decent, not the greatest but not the worst. And finally, updates. As we speak right now, this game literally got updated today. Now, it was a very questionable time on when it got updated, but hey, it still got updated. And I feel like what's really good about them updating now is that each of these updates that they keep doing with the game, it seems to be almost bi-weekly, or we're probably gonna have to wait up to 2 to 3 weeks for one update, which actually really isn't that bad since they add a decent amount of stuff to each of these updates, which currently the update that they actually added right now was solely Hollow based. But hey, still a lot of people are having fun, and a lot of people are actually making their Hollow builds right now too, if you didn't have one to begin with. And I feel like if the developers continue to keep actively updating the game and keep balancing the game and keep listening to the community, they will continue to see success with their game. I keep saying this with the majority of Roblox anime developers. They love money, but for some of them, they love money too much that they get blind and not listen to the community, which causes them to lose money. If they want the most money, if I'm being quite literally honest, keep updating the game, keep balancing the game, so people will keep staying on the game and not complain about everything. So yeah.